You are 12 years old. You smell like goats. And someone just decided you're beautiful, which, in the Ottoman Empire, is a logistical problem. The morning mist hasn't lifted yet. Sheep bells in the distance. Your mother is crying into a scarf. The men with turbans and ledgers are smiling like they've done you a favor. You don't understand the language, but you understand the pointing. They're pointing at you. Your mother says it's an honor. The goats disagree, and so do you. Silently, of course, because in a few minutes, your name won't matter. Welcome to Topkapi Palace, where boys like you are trained to be pleasing, obedient, and ornamental. This is going to be a very elegant nightmare. Get comfortable. Press subscribe, and tell me what century you're watching from. Now then, let's talk about how you won't survive. You are beautiful. Unfortunately, that's not a compliment. It's a sentence. They noticed it before you did. The curve of your cheek, the angle of your collarbone, the way your lashes throw a little shadow across your face when you look down. No one told you this meant danger. They just said you had a fortunate face, whatever that means. But in the Ottoman Empire, a fortunate face could get you stolen, castrated, crowned in silk, or all three. In that order. You didn't win a prize. You were assessed like a melon at the bazaar. Let's be precise. What did they look for? Well, symmetry. That was big. Long limbs, graceful walk, skin like parchment, eyes that didn't dart around too much, posture like a statue, no freckles, no scars, no broken noses, and no attitude unless it was charming. Not too thin, not too stout, a boy who could be turned into art, basically. But art that listens. Now, they weren't always so overt. Sometimes it was cloaked in language like education opportunity, imperial selection, or my personal favorite, honored entry into palace life. But let's not pretend. You weren't chosen because you're clever. You were chosen because someone important wanted to stare at you across a velvet room. And this is where the myth starts to grow, that boys like you were lucky to be chosen. Ah, yes, they'll say, the palace boys. What refinement, what luxury, what silks. And that's true, technically. You will learn to speak 5 languages. You will bathe in rose water. You'll even sleep on cushions that cost more than your village. But you'll also stop smiling with your eyes, because you'll quickly learn refinement is just obedience in better fabric. Now let's talk history, since that's what you're pretending to fall asleep to. This whole charming system was built on something called the devshirme, or the blood tax. Starting around the 14th century, the Ottoman Empire developed a genius little method for recruitment. They would march into Christian villages, mostly in the Balkans, and politely kidnap children, usually boys, usually between 8 and 20, too old to cry the whole way, too young to resist effectively. They were taken to Istanbul, converted to Islam, and trained to serve the state in one of 2 ways. You became a soldier, a janissary, or if you were especially pretty, you became something else entirely. They didn't call you a concubine, not officially. That would be too obvious. They might call you a page boy, a court attendant, a student, but you'd know what you were there for. And if you didn't, you'd figure it out after your first lesson in how to kneel properly. Not for prayer, but for presentation. Now, before you assume this was all kept secret or whispered behind heavy curtains, no, not really. Foreign visitors wrote about it constantly. Venetian envoys described palace boys in glowing detail. French travelers commented on their elegance. One too excited ambassador described a court performance where The Sultan's favorites danced like angels in embroidered silk. You see, the Ottoman court operated under a different logic. Same-sex desire wasn't scandalous, so long as you were the one in power. Masculinity wasn't tied to who you desired, but how much control you had over them. So, a young boy in the passive role? That was no disgrace. It was a decoration. And so beauty, especially male adolescent beauty, became a kind of soft currency. It could buy you safety, or it could destroy you. Of course, you don't know any of this yet. You just know that the men who visited your village were not looking for farmhands. They were looking for grace in miniature. And somehow, you fit the shape. The worst part? Your neighbors congratulate your family. They say, "How proud you must be, your son chosen for greatness." They bring gifts. The butcher gives you an extra scrap of meat. The priest offers a prayer that doesn't quite make sense. No one says the word palace, but everyone avoids the word goodbye. And your mother? She kisses your hair, tells you not to speak unless spoken to, and places a thin silver coin in your shoe. For luck. As if metal in your shoe will do anything to protect you from marble walls and scented rooms. Back to the present. You're still standing there, on the road out of town. The cart smells like goat and lavender. Your wrists itch from the new fabric, and the man with the list is already asking about your favorite songs. Not because he cares, but because someone at the palace might want to hear you sing later. Ready? The road ahead is long, but it ends in silk, mirrors, and doors you'll never open again. The road to Istanbul is long and very, very quiet. You're not allowed to speak unless a guard says something first. And when they do, it's never good. So you walk and you listen. Your feet are already blistering. Your stomach is mostly empty. And your future? Well, that's being decided somewhere ahead, behind silk curtains in a palace you've never seen, by people who'll never learn your name. You're not walking alone. Dozens of other boys march beside you, some older, some smaller, some with eyes that haven't stopped crying. There was a boy named Emir once. He had a limp. He's not here anymore. No one talks about it. But the older boys walk faster after that. The nights are worse, cold, silent, and sharp. You sleep in barns, ditches, roadside mosques, wherever the guards find convenient. Sometimes you get a blanket, sometimes you don't. The food? Bread. Occasionally, sour cheese if the eunuchs are in a generous mood. And once, just once, a sticky fig that made half the boys cry from happiness. But don't get too attached to kindness. This is not a journey designed for your comfort. This is a filter, a slow, grinding test to see who will arrive soft and compliant, and who will break before the gates of Topkapi. They don't need all of you to survive, just enough. You wanted to be a shepherd. Now you're practicing small talk with a eunuch. Let's talk about them, shall we? The men in charge of this delightful field trip are eunuchs, typically black Africans, formerly enslaved themselves, now elevated into power. They wear fine robes and carry long sticks they rarely use. But the idea of being hit is always in the air. They walk with perfect posture and don't blink as much as they should. They don't speak often, but when they do, it's like law wrapped in velvet. One of them, the youngest, sometimes hums under his breath. One night, you see him slip an extra slice of bread to the smallest boy. The next morning, that boy is gone. You learn quickly. Nothing is free, and nothing goes unnoticed. Older boys, especially those on their second or third assignment, sometimes whisper to the new ones. Tips for survival. advice you didn't ask for, but you cling to anyway. Don't ask questions. Don't smile too much. If a horse dies along the road, don't look at it. Strange wisdom. But you memorize every word, because it's better than thinking about your mother's face, or the silver coin in your shoe, which you lost 2 days ago in a muddy ditch. You still feel it sometimes. Phantom coin. It meant nothing, but it was something from before you belonged to someone else. Some nights one of the guards lights incense as if to soothe your nerves. The scent is cloying. Lavender, or maybe rose. All it really does is remind you that someone important will be smelling like this. Not you. You smell like fear, and stale bread, and horse sweat. The stars are beautiful, though. It's the one thing that feels real. You stare up at them as your body aches, and your stomach knots itself like an old fishing net. And for a brief moment, you pretend you're just on a journey. That at the end of this road, there will be a school, a teacher, a room with books and songs, not velvet cages and polite punishments. But then someone coughs, and someone else whispers a prayer in a language you don't know, and the dream breaks, because you're not on a journey, you're on a delivery route. Eventually, you reach the outer rim of Istanbul. It's unlike anything you've ever seen. Domes, towers, gold everywhere. The air smells like cloves and bread and oil and something else you can't name. You hear bells and boats and voices layered in 5 different languages. Everything is huge. Everything is moving. And still, no one tells you where you're going until you see it. The palace, Topkapi, where men rule and boys disappear behind tapestries. You don't walk through the front gate. You're led around the side, through a stone archway, into a courtyard where birds are chirping too cheerfully for what's about to happen. There are more eunuchs, more robes, more silence. One of them reads your name from a list you didn't know you were on. From the Albanian coast, age 13. Good teeth. Good bone. Another eunuch looks at your hands, nods. You're told to strip, to bathe, to put on new clothes that feel more like a costume than real fabric. You're told not to speak unless directly addressed, which you weren't. So you don't. The bath is warm. It smells like cinnamon and mint. You try to enjoy it. You fail. A servant brushes your hair. Another one checks your knees. Someone takes your old clothes away and doesn't return. And that's it. The march is over. You've arrived. Sort of. Because you're not in yet. You're just near. One more test. One more assessment. One more moment where a man behind a screen decides whether you're worthy of disappearing. The others who marched with you. Some are kept. Some are redirected to the janissaries. Some vanish. And one, a boy who coughed too much, is sent back to the village. Alone. You don't see him go. You only hear about it in a whisper. And now, you wait. Outside a door with gold filigree, holding a piece of paper with your new name. A name you don't know how to pronounce yet. Congratulations. You've made it to the palace, but you still don't belong. Yet. If you've somehow made it this far awake, congratulations. If you're already asleep, even better. If you're still pretending this will have a happy ending, that's adorable. But we're just getting started. The gates of Topkapi close behind you with a sound that feels final. Not a slam, not even loud, just final. Like a book shutting at the end of a chapter you didn't realize you were in. And now, everything smells like incense and authority. You're inside, technically, but don't get comfortable, because the palace doesn't open its arms. It wraps around you like silk and slowly tightens. The marble beneath your feet is cool and veined like bone. The air is thick with the scent of rosewater, cardamom, and old rules. Voices echo down corridors, soft and smooth and accented in ways you've never heard. No one yells here, no one needs to. A eunuch nods, another gestures. You obey without understanding, because you've already learned, quickly, that asking questions is a fast way to be ignored harder. You're led into a side chamber, a small golden room with tiled walls and a copper basin that looks more expensive than your old house. You are undressed. Again. You are bathed. Again. Only this time the water is warm, the towels are perfumed, and someone quietly trims your nails like you're a museum piece. A different man, in deeper robes, brings you a scroll with your new name. You can't read it, but he assures you it suits your face. You want to say, I already have a name. You want to say, I already have a life, but no one's asking. Your hair is oiled. Your eyebrows are examined. Your jawline is measured with a tiny silver ruler, like you're being prepared for auction. And all the while, no one tells you anything. They just nod or murmur or click their tongue like a disappointed tailor. Finally, someone speaks to you directly. A senior eunuch, black robes, pale eyes, voice like silk over a blade. You will walk, you will eat, you will listen. You will not speak unless asked. Do not try to be clever. Do not try to be charming. Do not stand out. Then, very softly, don't be memorable. Just survive. That's your welcome speech. Not embroidered, not inspiring, just accurate. You're dressed in palace linen, pale, weightless, not quite yours. You're shown to your sleeping quarters, a shared room with 20 beds and no privacy. The windows are barred with latticework, but the light is golden, filtered through silk. It's beautiful and claustrophobic. On your bed is a single cushion and a folded slip of parchment listing your new schedule. Wake at dawn, wash, sit, learn, recite, eat, sit again, practice walking, practice silence, sleep, repeat. This is your life now. And here's the thing no one tells you. It doesn't feel like imprisonment at first, because everything is soft. The bedding, the voices, the footsteps, the rules. But softness isn't freedom. It's control in disguise. You meet your tutor next. He teaches calligraphy, Arabic grammar, and, subtly, obedience. Every mistake is corrected with a sigh, not a slap, which is worse somehow. He tells you the story of the prophet, the empire, the greatness of the sultan, and then quizzes you on how reverent your posture is while listening. You also meet the senior boys. They don't speak much, but they watch. They watch how you walk, how you sit, how quickly you bow. You watch them back, just long enough to learn the unspoken rules. Never touch someone else's food. Never lie down before lights out. Never talk about where you came from. Never cry where someone can see. They don't need to punish you here. Shame does most of the work. And when that fails, the hierarchy kicks in. Here's how it works. At the top are the chief black eunuchs, the real power in the palace. They control access to everything: food, books, clothes, even conversation. Below them, senior eunuchs who oversee groups of boys like you. They decide who advances, who stagnates, and who mysteriously gets transferred to other duties. Next are the tutors, scribes, and masters of etiquette, men who seem soft-spoken, but whose recommendations can define your entire life. Then come the senior concubines, not in title, but in presence. Boys who've been here long enough to earn robes a shade darker than yours, and voices just a little louder. And at the bottom, you. You are the newest, the softest, the most easily replaced. You have no voice, but every sound you make is noticed. This is not a prison of bars and beatings. This is a palace of performance, and your role is quiet. Later, you're served a bowl of honeyed rice and a single fig. You don't taste it. You're too busy remembering the warning. Don't be memorable, just survive. That night, as you lie on your back, staring at the silk lattice above your bed, you hear someone humming, softly. A lullaby, maybe, in a language you almost recognize. You don't know who it is, and you won't ask. But for a few seconds, you remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. And then, sleep takes you, because you'll need it. Tomorrow, the training begins, and you're going to need every ounce of beauty, silence, and luck you can muster. Congratulations. You've made it past the bathhouse, the gate, and the first round of silent stairs. You've survived your initial evaluation, kept your posture symmetrical, and resisted the urge to scream. So naturally, you're being enrolled in school. Not just any school, the Enderun, the finest educational institution in the empire, reserved for the brightest, most promising, most easily reshaped boys. The goal? To turn you into someone useful, or at least someone presentable. The Ottoman court doesn't just want attendants. It wants linguists, diplomats, artists, spies, performers, poets, and if you're really special, something with a pulse that makes the Sultan smile. The walls of the Enderun are clean white stone. The halls smell like parchment, oud, and quiet judgment. Everything is lined in gold, but in a tasteful, oppressive kind of way. Your first class? Silence. Not the concept, the practice. You're taught how to enter a room silently, how to sit without your knees creaking, how to bow without sighing, how to breathe like you're afraid to exist too loudly. After that, posture, how to stand as if you've never been tired, how to hold your chin just high enough to seem graceful, but not arrogant, how to walk in straight lines across polished marble without slipping or looking at your feet. A boy who stumbles is corrected. A boy who smiles too confidently is corrected harder. A boy who asks, "Why are we doing this?" is transferred, somewhere far less gilded. Next comes language: Arabic, Turkish, Farsi, Greek, and if you're very promising, French. You're expected to learn not just how to speak, but how to flatter, how to write a letter of apology that sounds like a poem, how to recite a compliment that feels like surrender, how to apologize for being noticed at all. You quickly discover that grammar isn't about communication, it's about survival. Then there's music. You're handed an oud or a ney flute and taught how to play songs you don't understand, in keys you've never heard. Your fingers bleed for the first few weeks. Your teacher doesn't mind. He says it helps you listen harder. You're also taught calligraphy, which in the Ottoman Empire is less about ink and more about soul. Each stroke is sacred. Each curve of each letter is meant to reflect your inner discipline. You once ask if you can write a poem in your own words. You're met with silence, followed by another lesson in spacing and margin width. Mathematics follows, not because anyone thinks you'll become an accountant, but because logic calms the spirit. And a calm spirit doesn't ask dangerous questions, like what happened to the boy who used to sit 2 mats down from you. But the real curriculum isn't in the books. It's in the observation. You are being watched, constantly, by your tutors, by the eunuchs, by the other boys, who whispers too much, who reads too fast, who hesitates before bowing, who forgets to tuck the cushion corners after prayer. Every detail matters. Because advancement isn't based on merit, it's based on polish, on how well you've adapted, on how little of your old self still leaks out through your eyes. You begin to hear the phrase, "He has palace manners." It's a compliment and a warning. It means you've learned to fold yourself down into something decorative, something elegant, something manageable. There are benefits to doing this well. You get better food, more bedding, access to the library, a tutor who smiles once. There are costs too. You don't dream as much. You forget your original language. You laugh less. And when you do, it's softer and shorter, and immediately followed by a glance around the room. One day, you wake up and realize you haven't thought about your family in 3 weeks. You're not sure if that's growth or damage. Probably both. Still, you're surviving, which around here is practically a promotion. You meet boys who have been here for years. Some have risen to near princely status. They recite poetry at court banquets. They walk beside viziers. One of them once met the Sultan's eyes, briefly. They're graceful, fluent, impossible, and terrifying, because they've learned not to flinch, even when humiliated, even when touched, even when praised too specifically. You are taught that the highest form of success is to be invisible and excellent at the same time. Congratulations. You're a multilingual poet who isn't allowed to think. Still, you practice. You memorize your lines. You rehearse your bows. You fold your garments the way you were shown, even though you're not entirely sure who you are inside those garments anymore. And every night, before sleep, you whisper your lessons into the dark. Silence, stillness, service, smile, survive. That's the motto, unofficially. It's not embroidered above the gate, but you can feel it in the stone. One night, your language teacher, a man with a kind voice and distant eyes, says something strange. The Sultan's greatest weapon is not the army. It's the discipline of the walls. You're not sure what that means, but you write it down anyway, because in this place even riddles have consequences. The Enderun makes you brilliant, but only in the ways they allow. You become fluid, graceful, impossible to offend, and so quiet. Sometimes you forget how to raise your voice even when you're alone. But you're doing well. You're rising. And that's the point. Because in the palace, nobody cares how you feel. They only care how you appear. Now, rest your eyes. Tomorrow, they'll test your ability to pour tea without looking at the cup. And no, that's not a metaphor. There are rules here, but not the kind you can write down. Not like, don't steal, or no running in the halls. These are softer, stranger, harder to prove, and even harder to forget. Rule 1. Your posture must never suggest discomfort. A straight spine. Chin lowered slightly, but not too low. Hands relaxed, not clenched, not fidgeting. When you sit, your knees stay close. When you walk, your feet never drag. If your ankle rolls, you pretend it didn't. Pain is unseemly. Pain is inefficient. Pain, they say, is a failure of discipline. Rule 2. Smiling is required, but only the right kind. You must smile when spoken to. Smile when a senior boy passes. Smile when the food arrives, no matter how small the portion. But never smile too wide. Too much enthusiasm is suspicious. Too much joy? Dangerous. The preferred smile is slight, polite, balanced at the corners. The kind of smile that could be removed in an instant, Should the conversation turn serious, you're taught to practice in the mirror, one side, then the other, then both together, until you can look pleased without ever looking happy. Rule 3. Silence is not just encouraged, it's engineered. You speak only when invited, and even then, briefly. No wandering thoughts, no clever jokes, no sudden questions about the rules. Your tone must be soft, measured, respectful to the point of vanishing. Even how you breathe is subject to critique. One boy sighs too loudly during a poetry recitation. He's reassigned to dish cleaning for 3 days. No one calls it punishment. It's a correction. Correction is common here. It happens in ways that feel gentle until they don't. A missed gesture in etiquette class? You recite palace ranks 50 times, knees on tile. A misplaced bow? You're ignored for a week by the senior boys, socially dead until further notice. But the real weapon isn't pain, it's humiliation. Because shame sticks, shame teaches. You once trip on your robe in the garden, not dramatically, just a small stumble. The tutor doesn't scold you. He just raises an eyebrow and says, "Even silk can become a chain if worn without care." The other boys laugh, not cruelly, just reflexively, and you learn faster than any book could teach you. Crying is allowed, by the way, just not here, not now, not where someone might see. If you must cry, you do it under your bed covers, face down, no sound, no movement if possible. And by dawn, smile polished, eyes dry, posture perfect. You might be wondering, what's the point? Why all this effort to sculpt your personality into marble? Because beauty fades, obedience doesn't. And in a palace where charm is currency and proximity is power, your greatest asset is restraint. You are here to make others feel powerful, not to feel anything yourself. A boy once speaks too sharply during a debate on Persian verse. He doesn't raise his voice, just his opinion. He's gone the next day, transferred to another wing or another fate. No one explains. No one asks. Instead, your tutor looks over the group and says, "Poetry is a flower. It grows best when pruned." You write that one down, not because it's wise, but because in this place, even nonsense can be prophetic. Now you're doing well. Your penmanship is praised. You've learned how to bow without creasing your robe. You can recite the lineage of 3 sultans while pouring tea without spilling a drop. Impressive, right? Yes, you're gifted. Just not in freedom, because you've become fluent in control, not just over your tongue or your limbs, but over your feelings. You've taught your face not to wince, your eyes not to flicker, your chest not to rise too fast when startled. You've mastered the art of being seen without being noticed. And that's what they want. The perfect palace boy isn't loud. He's smooth, silent, soft at the edges, capable of conversation, but never opinion, elegant but unthreatening, intelligent but deferential. You're learning to disappear in plain sight. And it's working. You pass unnoticed through gardens where decisions are made. You serve wine to men who command armies. You translate poems for women whose glances could change your future. And all the while, your real self, the one who once made jokes about sheep or cried when you stepped on a nail, that self is fading, not gone, but politely excused. This isn't trauma in the loud cinematic way. No one is screaming. No one is bleeding. You're not in chains. You're in silk, which is quieter, but just as tight. The only place you're still honest is in your dreams, and even those are getting more scripted. Sometimes you dream of your village, but the goats are wearing robes, and your mother has no face. It's fine. You're doing well. You're stable, useful, contained, which is another way of saying you are what they wanted. So now you sit, perfect posture, lips parted in a gentle smile, waiting to be summoned, to serve, to please, to vanish gracefully into someone else's power. Welcome to the art of emotional discipline. They won't clap for you, but they'll keep you. And here, that's almost the same thing. Everything in the palace has a price, even things that aren't for sale, especially those. You learn this the hard way, sometime around your 4th week in the bath queue. You arrive early, towel folded, posture perfect. You wait, then wait some more. And when the steam finally clears enough to hear your name, you're skipped. Twice. Later that night, someone casually mentions you should have brought a sugar cube. Not to eat, to offer. That's when you realize you've joined the empire's most refined black market. The shadow economy of submission. Forget coin. Forget official rank. Forget merit. This place runs on favors. A sweet word here. A stolen plum there. And most importantly, an alliance. Because the sooner you find a patron, the less likely you are to be chewed up by the palace machinery and spat out with your spirit tied in embroidery thread. Patrons come in many forms. There are older concubines, senior boys with connections and robes one shade darker than yours. There are tutors who can accidentally write your name at the top of the promotion list. There are eunuchs who might just happen to look the other way when you forget to bow. And if you're very lucky or very beautiful, there are viziers. Viziers don't whisper. They select and protect. In exchange, of course, for loyalty, charm, and an unwavering ability to never speak unless it's exactly what they want to hear. You find out quickly. The difference between a clean pillow and a moldy mattress is not a matter of rules. It's a matter of who likes you, and that, as you now know, can be bought. Not with money, but with submission, a compliment, a glance, a carefully timed silence, sometimes even with skin. But let's not pretend anyone calls it that. Here they call it devotion, or service, or proving one's elegance. You once saw a boy with chipped fingernails be escorted directly to the kitchens for discipline. The next day his nails were polished, and his meals were hotter than yours. He'd found someone with influence, someone who wanted to be obeyed and admired. You start to notice little things. The boy who gets second servings, he folds someone's laundry at night. The one with a soft cushion for prayers, he's memorized 3 love poems, none of which are his own. The one who never waits in line for a bath, he shares it with someone important. Even baths become battlegrounds. Soap isn't just soap, it's leverage. Oil isn't just for skin, it's a status symbol. If your skin glows, someone powerful wants it to. If you smell like rosewater, someone paid attention. If your towel is warm, you're protected. If it's damp and smells like mildew, well, you might want to keep your head down for a while. Sugar is the most common currency. It's rare, precious, sweet enough to be a bribe, small enough to be discreet. A cube in your sleeve can buy 5 minutes of privacy. 2 cubes might get you access to the silk scraps used to line the good slippers. But it's not just what you give, it's how you give it. Slip it too obviously, you're vulgar. Hold it too long, you're desperate. Offer it with the wrong kind of smile, you're suspected. This is not a barter system, it's theater. You're not bribing, you're offering homage. The key is to look like you enjoy being beneath someone, to offer things not because you need help, but because it's a pleasure to serve. That's the real currency here. Submission, artfully performed. And don't expect gratitude. No one says thank you for a favor. They just use you again. And if you decline, no one punishes you directly. They just forget you exist. No more second helpings. No more oil for your hair. No more casual protection from accidental elbow jabs during etiquette drills. No one says no here. They just whisper later. Sometimes you think about resisting, standing up straighter, refusing the performance. But then you hear what happened to the last boy who said, "I'm not here to trade myself." He's still here, just quieter now, quieter and colder, and always last in line for everything. So you adapt. You become fluent in eye contact, subtle gestures, perfect compliments that never sound too eager. Your poetry reading was luminous. I hope my posture today doesn't embarrass your instruction. Would you like the cushion tonight? I think it suits you more. It's exhausting, but effective. Eventually, you secure the protection of an older boy named Harun. He says very little, wears gloves at all times, but nods once when you offer your best stitched hand towel before morning prayers. You don't speak of it. You don't ask what he expects in return. You just sleep easier that night. And when your name moves up the rotation list in music class the next day, you don't question it. You just play better. Because in this place, success doesn't come from being the best. It comes from being chosen, and from knowing how to earn your cushion without ever appearing to need it. So yes, the economy runs on sugar, but it's built on submission. Everything you offer here, your grace, your quiet, your charm, is just a carefully wrapped favor in silk. You give it, hoping someone important will remember your name, or at least your face. Because in the Ottoman palace, love is too expensive, but usefulness is priceless. You didn't think it would involve dancing, and yet here you are, standing in a marble chamber while a eunuch adjusts your skirt hem. Yes, skirt. You're being trained as a kochek, a word that means, well, several things. Dancer, entertainer, delight, property. In practice, you are a boy who dances like a dream and is expected never to wake from it. The palace loves beauty, but it worships performance, and few performances are more prized or more perilous than the art of the kochek. You are dressed in silk. Tassels sway from your hips. Your hair has been grown out, oiled, and braided. Your waist is cinched with a golden sash that signals just enough femininity to please the court, but not enough to challenge it. Your hands are dyed faintly with henna, your cheeks brushed with something soft and pink, your eyes lined just enough to catch the candlelight. You do not speak. You perform. There is no applause, only glances and silence. Who were the kochek? They were boys, most taken young, too young to understand the job description, trained in music, rhythm, etiquette, and the delicate choreography of suggestion. They were taught how to glide, how to spin without revealing exhaustion, how to undulate their hips just enough to provoke attention, but never enough to provoke scandal. It's a tightrope act. And the rope is silk. The Ottoman elite adored them. Festivals, banquets, private salons. They danced at weddings, circumcision ceremonies, diplomatic receptions. They were everywhere, and yet never their own. A French diplomat once wrote, "These boys are as graceful as nymphs, and as desired as they are pitied." Yes, they were popular, too popular, because while their movements were praised, their status was always precarious. To be adored in the palace was not the same as being safe. Your job is to please, but not seduce, to shimmer, but not shine brighter than the wrong guest. If someone falls in love with you, you're blamed. If someone grows bored of you, you're forgotten. Either way, you vanish. Your training includes dance drills until your knees ache, balance work with water jugs on your head, posture correction, posture correction, posture correction, and something called emotional modulation, which basically means don't look scared when surrounded by strangers in a darkened hall who are pretending not to look at your legs. You're expected to smile, but not too often, to sparkle, but not demand attention. You are supposed to seem like a living ornament, something between a jewel and a ghost. And let's be clear, this is not art for art's sake. This is performance as politics. Your movement is rehearsed for the powerful. Your beauty is curated by those who want to be pleased, but never inconvenienced. You are not loved. You are consumed. And when the performance ends, you bow. You step backward, still smiling, always smiling, and then you vanish, quietly, back into the corridors you came from. Dance, smile, vanish. It's the unspoken motto of the Kochek. You become fluent in anticipation. Who likes what gesture? Who expects a deeper bow? Who watches your ankles more than your eyes? And who you should never turn your back on? The coins tossed after your performance aren't really gifts. They're reminders. You belong to this space, and this space belongs to the powerful. Sometimes you are given perfume, a silk scarf, a tray of sweets from a delighted guest. You learn not to eat them, at least not right away, because sugar might mean favor, or it might mean something worse. You sleep alone, but never feel private. Every movement is measured. Every rumor, dangerous. A single misstep on stage could be your last, because no one defends a dancer who made the wrong person uncomfortable. You hear stories. A boy once winked at a provincial governor. He was relocated to a fortress. No one says why. Another turned down a vizier's gift, not rudely, just politely. He was removed from the performance list. He now washes robes. But for the lucky, there is attention. And with attention, access. A Kochek who learns how to please without provoking, how to dazzle without daring. He might catch the eye of someone important. He might be protected, promoted, praised, until he grows too tall, or too serious, or too tired to smile on command. Then, of course, he's replaced. No one says goodbye to a retired dancer. They just stop calling your name. Your silks are folded away, your eyeliner removed, and you're sent somewhere quiet, where no one claps and no one stares. Some boys cry, others sleep better. You're still in the middle, still spinning, barefoot on polished stone, still catching the flickers of candlelight in your hair, still pretending the music is enough to make this feel like something other than hunger in disguise. This isn't just dance. It's diplomacy. It's obedience. It's survival. Choreographed to a flute. And when you're done, you bow again. Lower this time. Slower, because you're tired. But also because someone new has entered the room, and the music is starting over. You are rising. You've danced, bowed, studied, and smiled at the correct wattage. You've learned when to be silent, when to be charming, and when to vanish just before the trouble starts. You've been chosen, not just by a tutor, or a eunuch, or a second-tier vizier. No, the Sultan himself noticed you. He watched your performance. He laughed, softly, when you misquoted Hafiz in a way that made it sweeter. And then, with a glance no louder than a breath, you were elevated. You're now one of the favorites. A privileged position, and also a dangerous one. Because in the Ottoman palace, being admired is a liability, especially when others have worked just as hard to be overlooked exactly the right amount. Your bed is now warmer, your robes softer, you receive trays of sugared almonds, and for the first time, someone offers to brush your hair without being asked. But you also start waking up with a dull ache in your stomach, not from illness, from tension, because behind every whisper now, you know they're talking about you. The others smile, they compliment your voice, they offer to polish your shoes, and then, when your back is turned, they recite poetry about stars that fall too quickly, or roses that bloom before their time. It's flattering and terrifying. Being loved by the Sultan is wonderful, until someone else wants the spotlight you're standing in. And here spotlights are narrow and edged with blades. Let's talk about jealousy. In a system where your very survival depends on how others perceive you, a single favor from the Sultan can rearrange the food chain. It can displace boys who have been climbing for years. It can infuriate eunuchs who wanted their own protégés to shine. It can make enemies out of boys who used to share your sugar cubes. So, naturally, accidents begin to happen. A bath that's too hot. A robe mysteriously missing just before inspection. A cough that lingers longer than it should. After someone offered you a new scent. You learn quickly. Perfume is not always perfume. Yes, it's a symbol of favor. A luxurious splash of rosewater, musk, or jasmine to anoint the Sultan's chosen. But it's also an ideal delivery method for sabotage. It starts small. A rash around your collar. A scent that burns your throat. A vial left open a little too long. You're not allergic to rose oil, but someone decided you might be. Whispers begin, tiny floating knives. He coughed during breakfast. The Sultan hasn't asked for him in 3 days. He looked pale last night. Rumors, of course. But rumors are power here, and power is currency. You catch a senior boy slipping something into a pouch under his robe. He sees you watching, smiles, then offers you a sugared fig. You decline. Later that night, your pillow smells strange. You throw it out the window, just in case. Paranoia becomes routine. You rotate your shoes so no one knows which pair to tamper with. You stop drinking anything you didn't pour yourself. You ask the laundry boys for unmarked linens. You stop trusting anyone who smiles too early. And yet, you keep rising, because the Sultan still likes you. And in this palace, his gaze is the only weather that matters. One morning, you are summoned. You arrive in your cleanest robe. You kneel. You recite something soft and flattering about tulips. The Sultan chuckles. And just like that, your status is sealed. You are untouchable, for now. But you've learned something dangerous. The higher the pedestal, the sharper the fall, because love from a sultan is a moving target. What pleased him yesterday might bore him today. And worse, if he turns his gaze to someone else, your enemies won't hesitate. They won't kill you. No. That would be messy. They'll let you survive, just without protection, without sugar, without warm baths or soft pillows or smiling eunuchs. They'll let you fade, and no one will say a word, because in the palace, silence is policy, and vanishing is just another kind of transfer. So, you keep your eyes open, you keep your perfume bottle sealed, you memorize every cough in the hallway, every odd flavor in your food. and you perfect the art of being admired without ever appearing ambitious. You learn to perform gratitude, to bow more deeply, to smile at your rivals like they're your brothers. You become skilled in surviving attention. Because yes, being loved by the Sultan is dangerous, but so is being ignored. So you stay exactly where you are, visible, but not too much, charming, but not disruptive, loyal, but only to whoever's watching. You smile, you bow, you smell faintly of citrus and fear, and at night, before sleep, you repeat the new rules. Don't be the brightest, be the safest. Don't attract rivals, attract patrons. Don't win, endure. Because in this palace, the game isn't to thrive, it's to outlast. And so far, you're still here. You are never alone in the palace. There are always footsteps, always whispers, always eyes, half closed in polite observation. And yet, you have never felt so unseen. You eat among others. You sleep among others. You practice your music with 30 boys, all within arm's reach. And still, you are floating in a room full of ghosts. That is, until he looked at you. It wasn't a big look, not the kind sung about in French ballads. It was a glance, half a second too long. But in a palace where everything is measured, that half second changed everything. He had calloused fingers from the lute. He played better than anyone, but downplayed it like it was a flaw. He once offered you a fig. You pretended not to notice the note folded under it. It read, "You bowed beautifully today. The tutor was wrong." K. You never said his name out loud again, not even in your head, just in case. Because here's the truth. No one teaches in court etiquette class. Affection is forbidden, not officially, not in writing. But you know, everyone knows. You can bathe together, dress together, dance together in silks and incense. But the moment you care, that's a crime, because loyalty belongs to the Sultan. And feelings, they make you less obedient. And so romances, if they happen at all, are quiet. They live in glances exchanged over shared prayer mats, a thread sewn into the wrong hem, a poem buried in a calligraphy scroll, written in a meter only one other boy would understand. You once left a single pomegranate seed on your windowsill, and found it replaced the next day with a rose petal. No words. But words weren't the point. Every affection must be deniable. So you speak in poetry, in coughs, in small pauses before bedtime routines. You once brushed against his hand during a robe folding chore. It was like falling off a cliff and landing silently. You dreamed of nothing but his fingertips for days. And then, he was gone. No warning, no announcement, just gone. You asked a eunuch. He blinked slowly, then said, transferred to the kitchens. But you knew better. His slippers were still at the foot of his bed, his inkwell still half full. You waited a week, then a month. Then you stopped asking, because that's the punishment. Not prison, not lashes, silence, total surgical erasure. Sometimes you hear of worse. A boy who wrote a love note in the margin of a study scroll, sent to a tutor by accident. By morning, he had been reassigned to garden work, which sounds peaceful. Until you remember the garden in question sits outside the city walls, near the stables, next to the pit where garbage is burned. He came back a year later, quiet, bent slightly to one side. He didn't speak again unless spoken to. That's the thing about the palace. It lets you live, but not necessarily as yourself. And love? That's too much self for the system to tolerate. You are allowed adoration, but not intimacy. You may serve, but not connect. So you adapt. Again, you learn to keep your glances neutral, to pretend the extra slice of fig was just an accident, to bury your desire so deep beneath obedience, even you can't find it anymore. But sometimes, when the wind shifts, you remember him. You remember the way he hummed off key while trimming candles, the way he tapped out rhythms on his knees when nervous, the way he said good night like it was an apology. And it hurts, not like a knife, not even like a bruise. It hurts like absence, like a sound you expected that never came, like a smile you practiced that no longer fits your face. You are surrounded by people and completely alone, but you still write poems, not in ink, in memory, lines you'll never say, metaphors no one will decode. You recite them silently just before sleep, like a spell or a prayer. One night, a boy hands you a fresh towel. As he leaves, he says, "I think you folded mine yesterday. Thank you." You nod, smile, say nothing more. It's nothing. It's everything. It's dangerous. But it's the only thing that felt real all week. And that, more than any silk, perfume, or sweet, is why it's forbidden. Because the palace can own your schedule, your diet, your movements, but it can't control your heart, so it punishes you for having one. And yet, you keep loving anyway, silently, dangerously, beautifully, because some part of you, the part they haven't polished away, still believes in tenderness, even if it must be whispered, even if it ends in exile, even if all that's left is a petal and a fig and a line of poetry no one else will ever read. Congratulations, you've made it. Well, you've lasted, which in this system is close enough. You've survived the baths, the tutors, the whisper wars, the sugar economy, and the subtle threat of being too beautiful for too long. You've bent just enough to avoid breaking. And now you are being rewarded with something very prestigious and very permanent. It's called the chukma. It means exit. But don't let that fool you. You're not leaving. You're graduating into a larger cage. You line up at dawn. One final inspection. Your robes are crisp. Your posture faultless. Your face neutral as always. There's incense in the air. The senior eunuch is nodding approvingly. Someone reads out your name. Someone else hands you a scroll. And just like that, you no longer belong to the concubine quarters. You now belong to the state. You have become useful. You may be sent into the imperial court. You may be assigned to a distant province. You may become a scribe, a diplomat, a teacher, or, if you're especially talented in quiet cruelty, a spy. The same walls that once watched you learn to smile without thinking now commend your potential. You're clever, multilingual, well-trained in flattery, restraint, posture, and obedience. And you understand the unspoken mechanics of power because you lived under its gaze for years. This is your promotion. This is your graduation gown, with stitching made of silk and silence. Of course, the palace doesn't say this out loud. They call it imperial service. They say you've earned honor. They smile as they tell you that you've risen through the ranks, unlike those who failed to impress. But you know better. You know you didn't escape. You were repurposed. Your identity has simply evolved from ornament to instrument. You're now a tool, a finely polished, state-sanctioned, highly disciplined functionary. Your job? To maintain the machine. And eventually, to train the next boy. Yes, that's the part they don't mention in the speech. At some point, maybe next month, maybe next year, someone will knock at your new door with a list of names. Boys, young ones, new faces with frightened eyes and perfect cheekbones. You'll be told to help them adjust, to instruct them in the proper way to walk, sit, bow, recite, serve. You'll hear yourself saying phrases you once resented. That's not how we hold the bowl. Stand straighter, or the tutor will notice. Don't smile so often. It makes you look desperate. The words will come out of your mouth so easily. At first, you'll cringe. Then, you'll justify. After all, you're helping them survive, aren't you? You're smoothing their path, giving them the tools you wish you had. Except, you know the truth. You're passing down the leash. Because that's what the chikma really is. Not freedom, not recognition, replication. The system doesn't release you. It promotes you into itself. You've become the very thing you feared. The soft-spoken man who once adjusted your belt, reminded you to lower your eyes, corrected your tone. The one you hated, and secretly depended on. You are him now, and you will carry on the legacy of conditioning, of control, of quiet survival. Because the alternative is being forgotten. Out there, in the wider Ottoman world, your skills are only useful so long as you remain useful to power. You are not a citizen. You are not a man. You are a product of the imperial harem system and a servant of the Sultan. So you do your job. You tutor young scribes in calligraphy. You memorize foreign customs for diplomatic trips. You hand-select boys for music recitals and silently note which ones show too much personality. You learn to say things like, "He's promising but undisciplined. He might be better suited to the kitchens. He reminds me of someone we lost." You train with grace. You supervise with kindness. And you feel nothing. Because to feel, that would break you. And you weren't allowed to break when you were 13. So why would you start now? Sometimes, late at night, you wonder if any of it was real. The softness, the danger, the whispers pressed into your palm like folded paper. You wonder what became of the others, the boys who vanished, the ones who danced too beautifully, the ones who fell in love. You sit at your desk, quill in hand, writing a report about grain tariffs or border etiquette or some other important thing. And you catch yourself drawing a pomegranate, just the outline, just once. Then you scratch it out, because you are no longer a boy, you are a cog. And cogs don't dream. They turn, they grind, they train, they replace. That is the price of your graduation. You get a room with a view, and a window you're too busy to look out of. It didn't end with a scream, or a revolt, or a dramatic shattering of golden cages. No. The system that trained you, displayed you, repurposed you, simply faded. It took its final bow, without applause, and then it walked off stage while no one was looking. Welcome to the Tanzimat era, the grand 19th century Ottoman project of reform, reorganization, and very public attempts at appearing modern. The empire had new problems now. Europe was watching and judging, loudly, with pamphlets and monocles. Suddenly things like constitutional law and citizenship were in fashion. Diplomats wanted to talk trade, not tulips. And foreign newspapers were asking uncomfortable questions about what exactly was going on behind the latticework of Topkapi Palace. And so, slowly, the old systems began to shrink. The concubine institution, especially for boys, became less visible, less formalized, less officially acknowledged. Not because it was wrong, mind you, but because it was embarrassing. The empire didn't apologize. It never said, "We probably shouldn't have turned adolescent beauty into an administrative tool." Instead, it said, "What harem? We do diplomacy now. We're enlightened." Behind closed doors, of course, power still operated as it always had, in whispers and velvet. But in public, there were laws now. Slavery was abolished, officially, in 1847. You may pause here for sarcastic applause. The reforms came with paperwork. The paperwork came with signatures. And the signatures came with loopholes. Thousands of boys, like you, had already passed through the system by then. Trained, displayed, reassigned, forgotten. But now they were being forgotten officially. The eunuchs still cleaned the corridors. The senior favorites still wrote reports. But the title of concubine became awkward. And so it vanished. Like a stain on a silk pillow, scrubbed too vigorously to leave a trace. You remember the day your wing was repurposed. No announcement. Just new furniture. And a scroll tacked to the doorway saying, "Office of Agricultural Statistics." You sat at your desk, surrounded by echoes, the scent of jasmine still faint in the drapery, a ghost of music humming from the marble. But now the floors were polished differently, the incense trays gone, and no one bowed anymore. The palace became less fragrant, less cruel, less beautiful, less strange, and no one asked where the boys went. Some were reassigned. Some slipped into other roles, administrators, tutors, forgotten advisors. Some simply disappeared. And as the years passed, even their names evaporated, because there were no monuments, no medals, no memoirs, just gaps in the census, just records with the word transferred. The state moved on. It celebrated reforms, modernization, and diplomacy. But you remembered. You remembered the way your friend smiled when he wasn't supposed to. The way a senior boy cried silently into his blanket the night before he was reassigned. The way your name changed, your posture changed, your whole life reoriented itself around other people's pleasure. But no one wanted that story. Not anymore. They wanted railroads, telegraphs, new constitutions. The empire was dying, but it wanted to die with dignity. And so, it swept the concubine system under the carpet. Unfortunately for the empire, the carpet remembers every slippered foot, every silken performance, every whispered threat disguised as etiquette. Because institutions can lie, but velvet is honest. It carries weight. And in the folds of those forgotten robes, there is still grief, still glitter, still the echo of boys who were told their beauty was both blessing and job description. Now, visitors tour the palace. They walk through the old quarters. They marvel at the tiles. They listen politely as the guide explains that this was once the harem. And then they move on to the next hall, the next tapestry, the next convenient version of history. But if you listen carefully, if you sit in the silence just long enough, you'll hear it. The shuffle of slippers, the hum of a lullaby, the faint clink of a tea tray set down too gently. It's all still here, even if no one says the word concubine anymore, even if the empire has a constitution now, even if they scrubbed the walls. Some stories refuse to be erased. You were part of one, unwillingly, unasked, but real. And that matters, even if no one writes it down. Because when history forgets, textiles remember. You arrive at Topkapi Palace, but not as a concubine, not this time. You're wearing modern shoes. You've paid for your ticket. You're on the official tour. The guide smiles and gestures at the stonework, the domes, the tiles, the elegance. This was the imperial center of the Ottoman world, she says. Here, The Sultan conducted affairs of state, received ambassadors, and entertained his harem. She pauses for effect. A few tourists exchange knowing glances. Harem. That word still titillates, doesn't it? Then she turns. This way, please. We'll skip the smaller chambers and head to the audience hall. And just like that, the ghost rooms are passed by. No one stops. No one asks. No one notices the corridor that angles just slightly too tightly. The one that doesn't appear on the map. The alcove with no label. The hallway where the light dies a little too soon. The boys' quarters were never the main attraction. They were never gilded enough. Never scandalous in the correct way. They weren't the sultry women behind veils. They weren't the exoticized fantasy. They were servants, silken shadows, performers of grace and silence and shame. And now, they're gone. Not physically. The rooms are still here. The tiles still gleam. The marble is cool beneath your feet. But the stories? Vanished. The official plaques speak of sultans, viziers' battles, of architectural styles, of Persian tiles and imperial swords. Not one word about the boys who learned to sing lullabies they never heard themselves, who memorized etiquette like scripture, who were praised for being decorative and punished for being real. There are no statues for them, no memorial fountains, no small velvet rope marking the corner where one cried into his bedding. They were trained to be forgettable, and the palace, ever obedient to its legacy, has obliged. You stand in a side room. Your guide is explaining something about Suleiman the Magnificent, but your eyes are elsewhere. The light hits a mirror, an old one, framed in delicate mother of pearl. It reflects nothing but the floor, just stone, worn smooth by years of feet that didn't matter enough to be remembered. You wonder how many boys looked into that mirror, practiced their expressions, smoothed their sleeves, held back tears. You wonder if they recognized themselves, or if the palace erased them from the inside out, long before history got the chance. There's a saying among modern historians, what isn't recorded didn't exist, but you know better. You've heard the silk shuffle in your dreams. You felt the weight of unspoken rules in your bones. They existed. You existed. Even if no one wants to remember. And why would they? What empire wants to carve statues of its servants? What tour group wants to hear about adolescent boys trained to be quiet, pliable ornaments? What schoolbook wants to explain that the grandeur of Ottoman diplomacy was sometimes built on the backs of frightened, brilliant, beautifully groomed children? So the stories are left out. The mirrors remain, but no one looks into them. The rooms remain, but no one asks whose voice once echoed in the tile. Instead, they marvel at the bathhouses. They admire the domed ceilings. They take photos of the Gate of Felicity. And then they leave. Topkapi becomes one more pretty ruin, a stage without actors, a palace without its ghosts. But if you stop, just for a moment, and breathe, you'll notice something. The perfume is gone, yes, but there's still a scent, dust warmed by memory, stone that holds secrets, wood that remembers trembling fingers folding linens just right. And if you sit in the corner, not the center, but the shadowed corner, you might feel it. The presence of a boy who once hoped his poetry would be read, who once carved a flower into the back of a drawer, who once thought surviving was the same as escaping. You might feel a silence that is heavier than noise, because these are the ghost rooms, rooms that were never named, so they couldn't be mourned, rooms that were cleaned, scrubbed, repainted, but never forgiven, because no one asked them to confess, History didn't want the confession, only the architecture. It wanted the domes, not the boys. It wanted the walls, not what they saw. And so we call this preservation. We say the palace was saved. But what was saved? The mosaic? Or the memory? The silk curtain? Or the ones who stood behind it? You walk through the final corridor, back to sunlight, back to crowds. The guide thanks you for visiting. And that's it. Tour over. History moves on, but part of you stays behind, in that unmarked room, with the mirror, with the silence, because you know now, there were no statues for boys in silk, just mirrors no one looks into. You arrive at Topkapi Palace, but not as a concubine, not this time. You're wearing modern shoes. You've paid for your ticket. You're on the official tour. The guide smiles and gestures at the stonework, the domes, the tiles, the elegance. This was the imperial center of the Ottoman world, she says. Here, the Sultan conducted affairs of state, received ambassadors, and entertained his harem. She pauses for effect. A few tourists exchange knowing glances. Harem. That word still titillates, doesn't it? Then she turns. This way, please. We'll skip the smaller chambers and head to the audience hall. And just like that, the ghost rooms are passed by. No one stops. No one asks. No one notices the corridor that angles just slightly too tightly. The one that doesn't appear on the map. The alcove with no label. The hallway where the light dies a little too soon. The boys' quarters were never the main attraction. They were never gilded enough, never scandalous in the correct way. They weren't the sultry women behind veils. They weren't the exoticized fantasy. They were servants, silken shadows, performers of grace and silence and shame. And now, they're gone. Not physically. The rooms are still here. The tiles still gleam. The marble is cool beneath your feet. But the stories? Vanished. The official plaques speak of sultans, viziers, battles, of architectural styles, of Persian tiles and imperial swords. Not one word about the boys who learned to sing lullabies they never heard themselves, who memorized etiquette like scripture, who were praised for being decorative and punished for being real. There are no statues for them, no memorial fountains, no small velvet rope marking the corner where one cried into his bedding. They were trained to be forgettable, and the palace, ever obedient to its legacy, has obliged. You stand in a side room. Your guide is explaining something about Suleiman the Magnificent, but your eyes are elsewhere. The light hits a mirror, an old one, framed in delicate mother of pearl. It reflects nothing but the floor, just stone, worn smooth by years of feet that didn't matter enough to be remembered. You wonder how many boys looked into that mirror, practiced their expressions, smoothed their sleeves, held back tears. You wonder if they recognized themselves, or if the palace erased them from the inside out, long before history got the chance. There's a saying among modern historians, what isn't recorded didn't exist, but you know better. You've heard the silk shuffle in your dreams. You felt the weight of unspoken rules in your bones. They existed. You existed. Even if no one wants to remember. And why would they? What empire wants to carve statues of its servants? What tour group wants to hear about adolescent boys trained to be quiet, pliable ornaments? What schoolbook wants to explain that the grandeur of Ottoman diplomacy was sometimes built on the backs of frightened, brilliant, beautifully groomed children? So the stories are left out. The mirrors remain, but no one looks into them. The rooms remain, but no one asks whose voice once echoed in the tile. Instead, They marvel at the bathhouses. They admire the domed ceilings. They take photos of the Gate of Felicity. And then they leave. Topkapi becomes one more pretty ruin. A stage without actors. A palace without its ghosts. But if you stop, just for a moment, and breathe, you'll notice something. The perfume is gone, yes, but there's still a scent. Dust warmed by memory. Stone that holds secrets. Wood that remembers trembling fingers folding linens just right. And if you sit in the corner, not the center, but the shadowed corner, you might feel it. The presence of a boy who once hoped his poetry would be read, who once carved a flower into the back of a drawer, who once thought surviving was the same as escaping. You might feel a silence that is heavier than noise, because these are the ghost rooms, rooms that were never named, so they couldn't be mourned, rooms that were cleaned, scrubbed, repainted, but never forgiven, because no one asked them to confess. History didn't want the confession, only the architecture. It wanted the domes, not the boys. It wanted the walls, not what they saw. And so we call this preservation. We say the palace was saved, but what was saved? The mosaic, or the memory? The silk curtain, or the ones who stood behind it? You walk through the final corridor, back to sunlight, back to crowds. The guide thanks you for visiting. And that's it. Tour over. History moves on, but part of you stays behind, in that unmarked room, with the mirror, with the silence, because you know now, there were no statues for boys in silk, just mirrors no one looks into. You made it. You survived the silks and the shadows. You learned the languages. You danced the dances. You folded the linens, trimmed the wicks, poured the tea, without trembling. You were never the loudest, never the most beautiful, never the one they whispered about, which in a place like this probably saved you. You watched the rooms change. You watched the roles shift. You watched the palace forget. You survived. Technically, your name, long gone, replaced by titles, roles, niceties spoken through a veil of incense. Your voice, still soft, still measured, still carrying the weight of too many rehearsed answers. But your eyes, those still remember. They remember the boy who shared his figs, the dance you were praised for but never enjoyed, the tutor who corrected you for smiling too often. You remember the rules, because forgetting them was never safe. Posture straight, eyes lowered. Speak only when the silence asks. And still, somehow, there was a you beneath it all. A flicker, a heartbeat that refused to bow. It got quieter year by year, but it never disappeared. Maybe that's what survival is. Not triumph, not escape. Just endurance. You endured. Through renaming, through reshaping, through years of learning how to be invisible, artfully. Now the rooms are empty. The corridors are quiet. Topkapi is just another museum. But if you lean your head against the cold tile, if you let your breath slow, you might hear it. The ghost of music, the hush of rules, the sigh of a boy who once wanted to be a shepherd and instead became a shadow with excellent manners. This was never a fairy tale. It was a system. A delicate, brutal, perfumed system that made people into objects and called it elegance. You survived. Sort of. And now, finally, you can rest. No one is watching. No one is grading your smile. You may uncurl your posture. You may forget the script. You may let go. Sleep well. Unless, of course, your dreams still smell like jasmine and blood.